I want to welcome you to the Open Space Visitor Center and would like to encourage everyone to get out and enjoy our trails as well as our education opportunities that we have available. We have a lot of volunteers throughout our trails as well as the Visitor Center. And at the Visitor Center, we have volunteers who work at the front desk, who manage the garden, the Traditions Garden, as well as our Common Edge Habitat Field. And we would love to have you as a volunteer as well.
Here we are at the Traditions Garden, where we have many beautiful native plants that our volunteers work with. Our Traditions Garden is worked mostly by volunteers, and if you see the landscape, it's based on how our ancestors used to garden, waffle garden, which is over there, and gobble garden. And we also have a modern day garden, and we also have apricot trees.
Hello, Peter Callan here at the Common Edge Habitat Field. The Common Edge, where wildlife and people come together. And we have been working on this, Cameron Weber and I, on this project for the last 2 years. This is our 3rd year, and with the goal of getting some perennial native plants planted into the field here, which was a lot of clay. So we made sheet mulch beds and planted our perennial flowers into those. And we planted blocks of flowers for pollinators specifically to make it easier for bees and butterflies to get from flower to flower. So let's go take a look at some of these flowers that we planted. Here we are at bed B with the penstemons and the sulfur buckwheat. And if you just sit and wait for a while and be quiet, then you'll see more pollinators in your yard. Sometimes just moving or walking around, it disturbs them and makes them fly away. So just be patient and sit with your flowers, and after a while you'll see, here they come. Here's a little wasp coming up to the sulfur buckwheat. And the wasps are good pollinators too. They're not as fuzzy as the bees, but there are a lot of them and a lot of different varieties, so they are very important pollinators. This penstemon hasn't opened yet, but there's some native bees that have been visiting these. So then let's go over and see the patch of milkweed. We have some horsetail milkweed growing here. We'll take a brief stop here at the bindweed. Even the lowly bindweed is an important pollinator plant when there's nothing else. The bindweed comes out early, and the butterflies have been nectaring on this, as well as honeybees and native bees. So it is a useful plant, even though it's the bane of many gardeners. Here we are at the milkweed patch. We'll just approach slowly here. see our butterflies and big wasps, lots of native bees, small guys that you can hardly see swarming around. So this is horsetail milkweed. There are lots of species of milkweed in New Mexico, and they just grow, depending on the conditions. This field has a lot of clay, and so the horsetail milkweed seems to like that. We have 3 different types of buckeye butterfly: the gray, intermediate, and dark. The gray and dark being 2 different species, and the intermediate being a cross between the 2. And these look like gray. I think these are gray buckeye. Okay, shall we go over and see the ladybug nest, see if they're still here? Well, I think they've pulled out. But anyway, there was a nest of ladybugs here, of several hundred, that were all swarming out. But it looks like they've swarmed and moved on. And I don't know that they're pollinators per se, but they are very, beneficial insects. So nice to have in your yard. And so if you have undisturbed areas, clumps of bunch grass, they seem to really like this bunch grass here. That's where they've been congregating. So we have a lot of Plains coreopsis here too, and the butterflies really like that as well. And that's a native flower that has been coming up here kind of on its own and spreading around by itself. So that's always nice. Want to see that? Beautiful block of Plains coreopsis here with some large wasps, some very small bees gathering pollen, some butterflies. Yeah, it's a good patch. So something else I wanted to mention about the flowers, besides having these flowers in your yard or encouraging them to grow, the having water is a big deal. When the plants have soil moisture and aren't completely dried out, then they can produce nectar and attract these insects. You may have the flowers, but if they're dried out, the ones that have more moisture, those will be more attractive no matter what the species of them. You may have like something that is supposed to be good for pollinators, but if it doesn't have water and it's dried out, then they won't really be attracted to that. So just wanted to mention that too, the importance of providing water if you can. I know that's always a challenge here. Okay, well, anything else? Do you have any questions, Bill?
Wasn't sure if you want to talk about mulching and mitigating the soil some, just so that it would accept more water and such like that.
Okay. Yeah, so here when we started, this field had been plowed a lot. It had been overwatered, so the clay was very compacted. So what we did is we actually cut back on the watering and started sheet mulching, like composting in place, to build up soil above the clay, and then that's what we are planting in now in those beds. Also encouraging the grasses to grow, and building soil mainly, raking the bindweed off of the grasses so that they can grow. This all encourages earthworms and soil life to be able to live throughout the year, when the ground is covered, when it's not exposed and bare to the sun, when it has a steady amount of moisture, not being overwatered, not drying out completely. That really helps the soil life survive throughout the year, and so that will build, over time. And already we've seen in a couple of years a lot more diversity of plant life here and insect life.
You want to talk about worms at all?
Yeah.
Should we go look at one of the gardens, or do you?
So that the grasses and perennial plants do encourage worms. Every time you have a plant or even a log on the ground, something covering the ground, it's like throwing shade down into the ground, and the worms like that. And the roots themselves provide food, a little microenvironment that the worms are kind of higher on the food chain in the soil life world. And so yeah, that not digging up the ground or killing all the grass or making bare ground, the worms don't like that. They like to have cover. So even if you have wood chips on the ground or grasses that you can encourage to grow, that will help the worm life. And then of course you can feed them directly too with vegetable scraps and make a worm bin or compost pile, and that feeds them directly as well. But just in general, they like to have cover on the ground.
Okay. I think that's worthwhile, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bee City, for doing the Pollinator Week. Love you.
Okay, so we're over at a worm bin right now.
Yes.
I will rotate and...
So this idea was from John Zarola, a compost master here who does composting classes. And he had the idea of putting a bucket in the ground with the bottom cut out of it as a little worm garden or worm home. And then once the worms eat all their food, then you can pull the bucket off and they can stay in the ground and you can move on to another area. So this is a bucket with the bottom cut out of it. It's full of worm food, which is vegetable matter, leaves, and the worms live down in the bottom of that. If I dig way down in there, I might find the worms. Where are you guys?
But it is moist.
It is very moist. They're in there. And then the top is covered with wood chips or leaves to have a cover on the top, and they will eat this down. This was all the way to the top, so it's already dropped a few inches. And yeah, pretty low maintenance deal once you get that going, and the lid just helps keep the moisture in.
And how do you maintain it? Is it you add a lot of water, or do you
well,
just add
this field
food and
gets
such?
flooded, so it gets watered from the flood irrigation like once every 3 weeks. But it'll go 3 weeks and it'll still be really moist in there. So I'm not really watering this other than the once a month flood irrigation. So if you didn't have that, I would imagine you could just water it with a hose like once a month, and that would be plenty. But yeah, just check your moisture. If it's moist, you don't need to water it. But yeah, don't let it dry out completely. The process will stop if it dries out completely. So, but the bucket with the lid on it, it really keeps the moisture in. The layer of mulch on the top, it really doesn't dry out. So, pretty low maintenance way to do worms. And you know, as you get more material for them to eat, then you can start another one, dig another hole and put your bucket in and fill it up.
Thank you so much for joining us on this amazing tour with the Open Space staff and renowned permaculturist Peter Callan. We hope that you come back and visit us, and please think about how you can take what you've learned throughout this entire 5-day celebration and incorporate these wonderful practices in your own backyard by supporting pollinators. Thank you, and we'll see you next year for the 5th annual celebration.